Hear the good news of the gospel. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Thanks be to God.
Okay, the first reading this morning is from 2 Kings, chapter 2, verses 1 to 12. Now, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. The company of prophets who were in Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And he said, "Yes, I know. Keep silent." Elijah said to him, "Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." But he said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they came to Jericho. The company of prophets who were at Jericho drew near to Elisha and said, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And he said, "Yes, I know. Be silent." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But he said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. 50 men of the company of prophets also went and stood at some distance from them, as they both were standing by the Jordan. Then Elijah took his mantle and rolled it up and struck the water. The water was parted to the one side and to the other until the two of them crossed on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I may do for you before I am taken from you." Elisha said, "Please let me inherit a double share of your spirit." He responded, "You have asked for a hard thing, yet if you see me as I am being taken from you, it will be granted you. If not, it will not." As they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah ascended in a whirlwind into heaven. Elisha kept watching and crying out, "Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." But when he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them into 2 pieces. The next reading comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 3 to 6. And even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. For we do not proclaim ourselves, we proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your slaves for Jesus' sake. For it is the God who said, "Let the light shine out of darkness," who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. And the last reading comes from Mark chapter 9, verses 2 to 9. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them. From the cloud came a voice, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead.
Thank you, Donna. I think of Transfiguration like Christmas, New Year's Eve. After the fireworks and the celebration comes New Year's Day. And after the paper cups and hats have all been cleaned up, what's next? Well, there's a whole big empty year right in front of us. After seeing the transfiguration of Jesus, the disciples Peter, James, and John are left to figure it out on their own. After the prophet Elisha saw his mentor Elijah taken up in the whirlwind, he's left wondering, what's next? It's easier to concentrate on the dazzling light show and the fiery chariots and horses than it is to know what comes next. Now, Elisha was the successor to Elijah. He was an apprentice under Elijah's mentorship. Now, we don't know what Elijah saw in him. Elisha was in a field plowing with oxen when Elijah saw him and threw his mantle over him, which is a sign of him taking him on. At my ordination ceremony, my mentor gave me one of her stoles. It's this one right here that I'm wearing. As you can see, it's very beautiful and it's done with a lot of work, handwork in it. You can come look at it later. And it was like I was receiving her mantle. It was a token of her leadership passed on to me. And I felt both the privilege and the weight of responsibility that came with that. But I knew it was not mine to bear alone. It occurred to me that actually I haven't purchased any of my stoles, even though I have quite a few. I'm just going to show you a few of them. This one came from the Church of St. Philip the Apostle, which was the Anglican church where I was confirmed. This one comes from a friend who decided to leave parish ministry and become a chaplain. And this one was made for me by Sonny Schuler in celebration of my ministry here. And this last one is in orange for creation season. It was a gift to me from Hope United when I left Parry Sound and came to this area. So all of those mantles, all of those ministries that they represent have come with me, and they've been a part of me, and they've enriched my ministry as I've carried on for them and with them. Now, since then, I've been in a mentoring relationship with other pastoral charges. I've learned a lot from those experiences. The most important thing I've learned is when to keep my mouth shut and let the Spirit do its work. Hardest one of all. Now, recently I was asked to mentor a student who was at Emmanuel College. And when she first told me she wanted to be an ordained minister, I thought, why the heck would anybody want to do that? It's not that there aren't joys and challenges of ministry. It's that ordination is not the only path to doing that now. And I don't even know any other ministers in this area that used to be Kent Presbytery who are ordained ministers, who are still active. There's some retired ones. There's a lot of designated lay ministers. There's lay worship leaders. I know someone who is in diaconal ministry. And there's all kinds of pathways. You can do your pastoral degree, or your divinity degree in pastoral care, in music, in nursing, in so many other ways. It's not you don't have to be everything to everyone. And you don't need to spend 3 years in the ivory tower and then released into the world. Now it's more it's more site-based learning where people are actually working in a church and taking their studies on at the same time. So they're getting a taste of the real world at the same time that they're studying. And I think those are more realistic ways for people these days to study ministry. People don't come out of with their bachelor degrees all nice and shiny and go into ministry without having any world experience. That's just not the pattern anymore. Most people come into it as a second career, as I did. And that means also that you may come with a partner who already has a career as well. So it's not the same as it used to be when the minister and the wife and the children all moved into the manse together. So there are challenges to ministry, but I think there's opportunities as well. I see it as opening up. Well, I still wondered though, when I was talking to my student, what can I have to offer? What is it that she thinks I can do? But as we talked, I realized that I have some experiences and some hard-won lessons that I can pass on to her. I think mentoring is a kind of way that you are changed as much as the person you are mentoring changes. You have a chance to think about your ministry and what you believe and what you are passing on. Now, the relationship between Elijah and Elisha was that Elisha was sometimes kind of a pest. 3 times he is told to remain behind, and 3 times he refuses. And he repeats this vow, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." I kind of hear in that a bit of an echo of Ruth's words to Naomi, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you." Sometimes when we're faced with losing someone, we try to hold on even harder because loss and grief are very real. When Elisha sees Elijah being taken up in the whirlwind, he tears his clothes, which was a sign of grief. Similarly, when we lose someone, we mourn for them. Even though we know that they're now in heaven with the angels, we still feel the loss. It's been 40 years to the day since my father died. And that event changed me in ways that I couldn't even realize at the time. People said to me that I was too young to lose my father, but I was 29 and I didn't think that was young at all. My mother had remarried and moved on, so I felt like I had no family. But I've learned that family are the people that you call family. Perhaps Elisha felt bereft and held on to the one thing that he had left, Elijah's mantle. It wasn't a magic cape like a superhero's, but Elijah had struck the water with it in faith that God would part the waters, just as Moses had struck the water, the Red Sea, with his staff, in faith that God would part those waters. So Elisha needed the same faith and trust in God, that God would act that way. Because for Elisha, that was the next big thing. And even though he had asked for a double portion of Elijah's spirit, that wasn't for Elijah to give. What that meant, though, was that he was asking to receive the inheritance of an oldest son. So he was asking for sonship with Elijah. And even when he saw him going up, he cried, "Father, Father." So I think he did receive that affirmation. How God chooses to give the Spirit is a mystery. And if we knew how, then it wouldn't be faith anymore. It wouldn't be a mystery. It would be a certainty. So not knowing can be the hardest thing of all. Now, Paul's issue with the church in Corinth was that some of them felt that they had obtained certain knowledge of God. And people who didn't have this knowledge were believed to be weak in their faith. But it's not the case that some people have more faith than others. Everyone has the exact amount of faith that they're supposed to have. And Paul's statement on unbelievers has unfortunately been used to berate those outside of the church. It sounds like Christian triumphalism or worse, determinism. However, Paul was not writing about people outside of the community, but those on the inside. He's talking about the healthy state of the church, not about individual consciences. If there are people in the church who don't yet know the light of Christ, then shine on. The light of Christ was seen by the disciples in a very demonstrative way. Peter, James, and John see Jesus in this very otherworldly way. It's like they're able to reach through that veil between this world and the next and see into it. Jesus' clothes are shining, just like the face of Moses did, and just like the angel will at his tomb. And the disciples see Moses and Elijah, the very embodiment of the law and the prophets. And then Peter, once again, gets it all wrong. Poor Peter. In the last few verses, he declared that Jesus is the Messiah. And then he was rebuked by Jesus when he didn't understand that the Messiah is to suffer and die and be raised again. He wants an earth-based Messiah with 2 feet planted firmly in the ground. Peter even seems to forget that he called Jesus the Messiah, because now he addresses him as Rabbi. And he wants to give Jesus and Moses and Elijah 3 tents or booths, one by the other, to signify what has happened here. Well, a cloud descends upon them, like the cloud on Mount Sinai and the cloud that appeared on the tent of meeting in the wilderness. And a voice comes from the cloud saying, "This is my Son, the beloved." And those are the same words that were at Jesus' baptism when the cloud came down and the dove appeared. And yet there's a difference here. The words are added, "Listen to him." In other words, pay attention. Stop being so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good. It's like after the ascension into heaven, when the angels appeared and said, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking upward into the sky?" Now, to be fair to them, it's not every day that you see your Lord being transformed before your face. You would think that this would be the defining moment for the disciples of Jesus' revelation. Well, you'd think they couldn't possibly have had any more doubts after that. One scholar even refers to the Transfiguration as God's PowerPoint. But on 2 more occasions, Jesus will foretell his death and his resurrection, and again they will fail to understand. They will argue about who is the greatest. And James and John will even argue about who is going to be at Jesus' right side and on his left. He will be betrayed by Judas and denied by Peter 3 times. Perhaps the Transfiguration isn't the whole show, but just a hint as to what is to come. It's like a trailer for a movie that leaves you wanting to see more. Because Jesus said he would come in the glory of my Father with the holy angels. And just before the Transfiguration occurred, he said, "There are some standing here who will not taste death until they see that the kingdom of God has come with power." Is that what Peter, James, and John saw? Were they given the gift of seeing just a glimpse of that kingdom? So what's next for them? Well, they're the same 3 disciples that Jesus asked to pray with him in the Garden of Gethsemane before his betrayal and arrest. 3 times they fall asleep. 3 times Jesus tries to wake them up and says, "The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Now, when people don't know what to do, they tend to fall back on what is familiar and what is known. After the resurrection, 2 disciples will walk to Emmaus. 7 others will go fishing. So what's next for us? After the pancakes, the ashes, 5 Sundays of Lent, Palm Sunday and Good Friday, what's next? Well, we all know what's next. Easter comes next. But the real test of Lent is not to jump ahead into Easter, but to stay in that reflective mode, that unknowing time. You see, we know what's next, but the people who were closest to Jesus, they didn't. So let's try to journey with them and find out what happens when we suspend our knowing and enter the mystery with them. May the journey of Lent be for us all holy times we ponder in our lives of faith. What's next? May it be so. Amen.